So here's an interesting conundrum. Here's a conundrum. You're given 20 minutes to teach a class and a choice of two subjects. You can teach them about the laws regarding the prohibition of murder, or this is a Jewish studies class. You can teach them the Jewish way of putting on shoes. So let's just think about that for a moment. You can either teach the laws prohibiting murder, or the laws according to Shulchan Aruch about how to put on shoes. There are laws about how you put on shoes, and let me tell you, it's fairly simple. When you put on your shoes, you're supposed to put your right shoe on first, and then your left shoe. But when it comes to tying shoelaces, you actually tie the left shoe first. I think this picture is of a right foot. You tie the left shoe first, and then you tie the right foot. And I explained to you why. We always give precedence to the right side when performing a mitzvah or even when getting dressed. That's supposed to be the more important side. It's actually the side of the body that represents the attribute of chesed, the loving kindness, and therefore you give that side precedence. When it comes to tying, so there's a mitzvah that's done with straps that involves the left, and that is the mitzvah of tefillin, which you wrap around your left arm, unless you're left-handed, when it goes on your right. So therefore, in order to give honor to the mitzvah of tefillin, you actually tie your shoelace on the left foot before you tie a shoelace on the right foot. So yeah, coming back to our conundrum. So there we go. You are a teacher. You're given a choice of two topics. You've got the class for one 20-minute lesson. Which do you choose? Now, if you think about it carefully, you would actually choose the laws of putting on shoes. Why? Because your students are unlikely ever to, most of them are not antisocial individuals. They're not psychopaths. And chances are they will not be tempted to murder. However, they will have to get dressed every day, and if they don't get you a lesson on how to get dressed according to the Jewish traditional practice, they won't actually ever know that. So that would be the correct choice, would be to actually teach that law. You see, a lot of Yiddishkeit is in the detail. A lot of Judaism is in performing rituals according to very specific, prescribed instructions. Now, people kind of tend to resent that a bit. We don't like rules. We don't like to be told to do things in a particular way. We like to think of ourselves as mature individuals who want to understand and then do it our way. And when we give them specific sets of laws and rules, we don't particularly appreciate it. So, I've explained to you the shoe thing, but really, should halacha be dictating to me how I get dressed, which shoe I put on first, and how I tie my shoelaces? We don't like it. Let me go back to the parasha of last week and share with you a classic commentary of Rashi, which is actually a quote from the Sifra, if I'm not mistaken. And Rashi comments on that first verse of the parasha. Now, you may remember, you may not, but the parasha began with the laws of the sabbatical year, the Sabbath of the land. And once in 7 years, the land has to lie fallow. And it is prefaced with the words, the Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. Now, Rashi is going to pose to us the question, why tell us about Mount Sinai? What's the connection between the Shemitah, that's the release of the fields of the seventh year, and Mount Sinai, particularly as all the commandments were stated from Sinai? This teaches us that just as with Shemitah, His general principles and his finer details were all stated for Sinai. Likewise, all of them were stated, their general principles together with their finer details from Sinai. I'm going to ask for the indulgence of those who were in shul on Shabbos morning. I see Stan and Fabio, and maybe some who haven't got the cameras on, so I can't spot them as easily. Where I did touch on that. Let's understand why the Torah chooses to discuss Mount Sinai and to mention Mount Sinai in the context of the mitzvah of Shemitah. The answer is as follows. There are certain commandments that are very easy to understand. And there are other commandments that are impossible to understand. Now, let me perhaps illustrate it in the following way. You are invited to take a tour through the Chernobyl nuclear reactor. And the guide gives you instructions. He says, be careful, hazmat suit zipped up all the way to the top. You got to wear the hat, you got to wear the mask, you got to cover your face, you got to wear these special rubber boots. You think to yourself, can't catch radiation even through green boots. No, I'm not going to wear boots. They're hideous. I'm going to wear my own shoes. You won't ever dream of doing that because you understand so little about the way radioactivity works that you're not prepared to take that chance. So you're going to follow the instructions to absolute detail. You're not going to even, because you don't understand the instructions, you don't understand how it works, you're prepared to submit to the knowledge of the scientists who have studied this and they know exactly how this should be done. However, if it comes to a law that you understand very well, you're going to start rationalizing, saying this part of it is important and this part is not. This part I'm going to follow, but this I have a better way of doing. That's just human nature. Once we think we understand, we want to do it in our own terms. If something is beyond us and we're totally lost, then we're prepared to accept that certain level of, attention to minute details. Now, what's the connection now with the sabbatical year Shemitah? Shemitah is a once in 7 year observance. This happens to be this year is a sabbatical year, year 5782. And what happens? Well, all farmers let their lands lie fallow and they dedicate themselves to spiritual growth. They study, they remove themselves from their connection with the ground, and they grow spiritually, possibly emotionally, possibly they rest up. Sounds like something that makes a lot of sense. Really sounds like something we should all be doing. And in fact, in many professions, there are, accumulated long leave holidays or sabbaticals, as they call them in the academic world. It makes a lot of sense that, you can't just go and go and go and go and go. There comes a point at which you have to step back and just be you and not just go crazy about your connection with the land and agriculture. And the other aspect of the sabbatical year, once again, apologies to those who were in shul on Shabbos, that is the cancellation of debt. So all bad debt falls away in that 7th year. That also makes a lot of sense because at the end of the day, we got to find a way of redressing social inequalities. Socialism has not been the greatest success as an experiment. How are we going to redress that? How are we going to make sure that poor people are not burdened by their bad decisions forevermore and that they can get a new lease on life? So both aspects of that sabbatical year make a lot of sense. And human nature would therefore be to do it in our own terms and to say, hey, wait a second. It doesn't have to be, every 7 years. I can do it every 10 years, or, it doesn't have to be complete cancellation of debts. I'm going to be a good guy, and I'm going to, give good terms and let the people pay it off slowly over a long period of time. But just to give up all that debt and forego it, etc. We start to rationalize because it's a mitzvah we so well understand. Says Rashi based on the Sifri. the details of the mitzvah, as well as the general concepts of the mitzvah, all was given at Sinai. Even those mitzvot that make so much sense to us, and that we would therefore want to try and observe on our own terms. Even those mitzvot were given in absolute detail on Mount Sinai, and so it is with every single precept that Hashem has given us. It's all from Sinai, and it must be observed with the same meticulous level of care as the instructions if you're entering into Chernobyl nuclear plant. Let's move on to this week's parsha, which begins with these words: Im bechukotai telechu, mishpatai tishmeru asitem otam. Now, what is bechukotai? Bechukotai is my statutes. What are statutes? From the Hebrew chukim. Chukim, we are told, are laws that do not make sense, that defy any kind of explanation, of rationalization. And generally, mitzvot of the Torah are divided into kind of three columns. If you take all 613 mitzvot, you could either place them in the chukim column, or in a mishpatim column on the other end, or a middle column called edot. And let me explain what these three terms mean. Chukim just means statutes, laws that have been promulgated that are beyond human understanding. And there are many laws, but probably the model that comes to mind, red heifer, purity, impurity, taking ashes of an animal, burning it, to obtain the ashes, of course, sprinkling it. The whole thing sounds like hocus pocus and makes no sense at all. It's a commandment. It's got lots of detail to it. That's in the one column. On the opposite end, you have laws that make absolute sense. Right? We had the do not murder earlier. Those are mishpatim. Those are laws that God commanded us, but we have no difficulty with it because we know that do not murder, do not steal, do not covet, etc. Those are all precepts that are important for the world to function. And if we didn't have those laws, we'd have some other kind of similar system, because one needs to have laws that dictate human behavior, particularly towards one another, in order for the world to function, to go smoothly, and not to self-destruct. As Pirkei Avot says, if there wasn't authority, then we would swallow each other alive. Interesting thought, a way of describing it. In the middle are edot. Those are laws that they're definitely, divine commandments, not the kind of thing that I would ever have thought about myself, but I understand, and edot from the word aid, testimony, witness. There will be a witness to something. So take Shabbos being witness to the creation of Hashem, 6 days and the seventh day, the Sabbath day. Take Pesach, which is, you couldn't have made up those, eating matzah for 8 days or 7 days. Who could think of that? But it makes a lot of sense. That's a food they ate when they left Egypt. That's the food we're going to eat for 7 days. And the Seder symbolizes, but all symbolic mitzvot that we make a lot of sense in terms of how they observed and so forth. So there's kind of the three categories of divine precepts. On the one hand, mitzvot that God gave us that we don't understand, at least. On the other hand, mitzvot that are totally logical, and then the middle ones, which are mitzvot that, yes, we could understand them, but we would not necessarily have made them up ourselves. They're definitely divine precepts. Which most important? Now that's a silly question. Let me rephrase. Which of those mitzvot create the strongest bond with Hashem? Way back when I taught primary school, and I taught them very much this three categories of mitzvot. The way I refer to the chukim, or those mitzvot that defy understanding in child's language, but I think even at our age, I told you so mitzvot. We all remember, But why? But why, mommy? But why, daddy? Do I have to do that? Either you can try and explain, or you can start, rationalize with the child and say, interest, it's the right way to do it, it's how we do it. Or you can decide that the child does not have the intellectual capacity to really grasp why this is the right way of doing. And so you resort to that. You're going to do it this way because I told you so. Which kind of instruction creates a trust and a bond between parent and child? Type of stuff where you have to explain to your child and he understands, she understands, and does it because of your explanation, or where the child blindly follows the instruction because they trust you. And that's not only a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, but sometimes even an older child, even an adult child will come to you for advice. And you say, look, I'm telling you, do it because I'm telling you, because I understand things better than you. And if the child does it, it shows an unbelievable level of connection, of trust, of acceptance, of apparent superior knowledge in this case. In the mitzvot that are chukim, when you do a mitzvah, simply because God commands you to do a mitzvah, and you don't understand it, that creates a relationship that is much more powerful than saying, well, I'm not going to murder because God said so, but I understand that that's important for the functioning, the running of the world. No, Hashem says, take a red cow and burn it and grind it down to ash and then sprinkle it and mix it with water. And you're thinking, hey, what is this hocus pocus? And you do this creates a much deeper bond with Hashem. In fact, all mitzvot, every one of the 613 that we perform, should be done with that chukim mode of, yes, I do understand it, but I'm not doing it because my intellectual capacity, my brain can grasp it, because at the end of the day, what we have in between is fairly finite. It's contained within a skull, and even though the research shows that we don't use except for a minute fraction of the brain power that we have, but even if you used all of it, it will still be very finite in comparison to Hashem. So even if we could grasp the mitzvah with our minds, it would be only a limited, very small, how would I say, very limited appreciation and grasp, because one doesn't really have a full understanding of Hashem and therefore of His words, of His mitzvot. So when we perform any mitzvah, even one that makes a lot of sense, it's totally logical. We still perform it, realizing that at some level we're doing this simply because we are connecting at a very deep level with the giver of the Torah, with the giver of the mitzvot, and that makes it far more powerful. So even though there are some mitzvot that will fit into the column of chukim, edot or mishpatim, all of them deep down are chukim, all of them are I told you so mitzvot, all of them are God's commandments that we perform simply because it was a given. There's a deeper understanding perhaps of the concept of chukim, because the word chukah is also connected in Hebrew grammatically to the word chakika. Chakika means engraving. Engraving is a very powerful connection with the medium. When you write on paper, and you've got ink, you've got paper and ink on paper, but it's still ink on paper. As much as we've got very good inks that stick and don't dry and disappear, but it's still a separate medium. It's not become one with the paper. A story. There was a Chabad rabbi who went in the 40s, visited Chicago, to visit the Jewish community there. And he was a shaliach. He'd been sent by not by generation, but his father-in-law, Yosef Yitzchak. One of the people who he met there in Chicago challenged him and said, "What's this all about? What are you doing here? What's the point of this visit? Where are you going from one person to the other? It's not like you're collecting money for any cause. You're just coming to chat to us, and talk to us about Judaism, about our faith, about God. Well, what's it all about?" And the rabbi, the young rabbi, gave the following analogy. He says, in the days of old, he had a sofer, and the sofer, the scribe, he used to travel from town to town, arrive in a town, and spend time there repairing the Torah. The Torah is a cracked letter, it's possible. So I know my good friend Rabbi Klein just spent this past Sunday in Cape Town, did precisely that, because I don't think there is don't know if there's still a sofer in Cape Town, unfortunately. The one sofer left us a few months ago. The other one has moved on to Portugal. And I don't know if there is one, you can correct me, but Rabbi Klein went there for the day and he was fixing Torahs in various rules. So that's the job. So, you found a letter that's cracked and faded, you fix it. That's my job. And he really liked that analogy so much that when he came back to New York, he wrote a report to the Rebbe about his visit and the people he had seen, including this story. So chuffed he was with that, analogy of the Torah that has a letter crack that has to be fixed. The Jew who needs a little bit of a boost to reignite his soul. That the rabbi comes to touch up that letter in the Torah. Of course, a powerful metaphor because every Jew's got a letter in the Torah. There's a connection, and the word Yisrael for Jew is an acronym for Yesh Shishim Ribo Otiot LaTorah, which means there are 600,000 letters in the Torah. Don't count them because you're going to catch me out, because there's not quite as many as that. It's short by a couple of 100,000, but that's for a different shiur. But it just shows that there's an intrinsic connection between the letters of the Torah and the individual Jews. So it was a fairly good analogy. He liked it. And he kind of self-congratulated himself by including that story in the report about his visit. He sent in to the Rebbe. He got a response and a thank you for the report and a comment on the analogy. The Rebbe wrote back to him and said, great analogy, however, not quite correct. A Jew is not a letter in the Torah that can fade away, crack, and pop off the parchment. A Jew is like an engraved letter in a stone tablet. An engraved letter in a stone tablet will never get erased. It may become illegible because dust and schmutz can gather in the crevice and it can no longer be read. But it doesn't have to be rewritten. Once the letter is written, it can just be blown away, cleaned with a feather, and the letter reappears. And that's a connection of a Jew to Torah, a Jew to Judaism. It's one where it's kind of like b'chukotai, engraved. And the two concepts, the two meanings of the words are connected, because if you connect to Hashem with that blind faith of, I will do that, God, because you told me to, then you will establish a connection with Hashem that runs so deep that it can never be in any way removed. It can become corrupted and dirty, but it can never be severed altogether, as would ink on parchment. I'm going to conclude with a story. There was a young chap who begged his parents to send him to a Jewish school. And after much insistence, the parents said, okay, we'll try this out and see if it works. We're not religious. You go to school, it might clash with our value system, but let's give it a try. Maybe you'll go for a couple of days, maybe it'll work, maybe it not. We're going to be open about it. So the child goes to Jewish school, and at the end of the day, parents say, youngster, what did you learn in Jewish studies at your school today? He says, oh, we started Shulchan Aruch from the beginning. And one of the first chapters of Shulchan Aruch is about how a Jew gets dressed in the morning. So the teacher explained to us that when you get dressed, you put your right shoe on first, and then your left shoe on. But when it comes to tying the shoelaces, you should actually start on the left and then only tie your right shoelace. So father was livid, he says, and for that, they want that kind of money. This is your last day in Jewish day school. You're going back to the government school tomorrow. And that was, in fact, the end. So that was it seems, some total of this guy's Jewish education. The years passed, and the connection with Yiddishkeit kind of shrunk and became very, very, very tenuous. And anyway, so a few decades later, this fellow has very little connection with his former Jewish roots, not former, but the former acknowledged Jewish roots. He has now met a young lady. How do we always say? She's not Jewish, but she's a wonderful young girl. Wonderful young girl. A wedding date has been set, and yeah, that is going to be his fate. Unfortunately, he's going to be married to her. The children will not be Jewish, and that will kind of, thin out the little bit of connection that there was to Yiddishkeit until then. The wedding date is set, invitations are sent. On a set day, the young man walks into the room as everybody turns around to greet the groom. He's walking up the aisle towards the place where this marriage will now be consecrated, and suddenly he realizes that his shoelace is loose. And so he bends down to tie the shoelace that was loose, and suddenly he has a flashback to the only Jewish lesson he ever heard in his life. When you get dressed in the morning, you put on your right shoe and then your left shoe, but then when it comes to tying your shoelaces, you make sure to tie your left shoelace first. He looks down at his toes, and there, sure enough, he has actually crouched down to tie his left shoelace. He does, then he turns around and walks out the back doors of the wedding venue. Don't know if it's a true story or not, but it's definitely a powerful story, and I've heard it. It's been goosebumps every single time. So yeah, if you were a teacher, you had a choice of teaching the prohibition of murder or how to get dressed as a Jew. Which would you choose? Thank you.